Okay. Hi, everybody. First of all, we are so excited to have you join us today, and we appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules. I'm Raz. I'll be moderating today's panel. I'm VP Product Strategy at Wiz, and I've started my cybersecurity career over 10 years ago in the Israeli 8200 unit, and I've been building security products since. So today we will be having a 25 minutes panel discussion, and then we'll save 5 minutes at the end for a live Q&A. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat throughout this session, and we'll address them at the end in the Q&A. And with that, I'm excited to be joined today by a great expert panel who will be sharing their personal experience and perspectives as CISOs in the financial services industry. Rather than trying to summarize and explain why they are the perfect speakers for today's topic, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves in their own words. So to start, can each of you please tell us a bit about your professional background as it relates to today's topic? And Tony, I'll be starting with you.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you in the audience today. I'm currently the Chief Information Officer, CIO, over at Urban One since, I guess, around 2018. Prior to that, I was 25 years as a CISO, mostly in financial services, probably most known for the work I did at Capital One to really move the first large scale, public financial institution to be cloud native, but also spent time at Tyco International, Equifax in the early 2000s, and First Data, which is now Fiserv as well.
And David, to you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, David Cass. I'm currently managing director at GSR, where I'm their CISO, where I'm in charge of enterprise IT, privacy, and security. So we're a crypto market maker. Prior to doing that, I've spent most of my career in financial services on both sides of the house, both from a banking side, being ex-PwC and ex-JP Morgan, as well as the past 2.5 years I was the vice president of cyber and IT risk for LISIC at the Federal Reserve, which is large institution supervision, where I was one of the senior regulators for the 8 largest banks in the world. So I have a background in finance. I have a master's in finance and a master's in engineering, one from MIT, one from University of Pennsylvania, and I'm adjunct faculty for Harvard. And I've had the, honor to co-author some of the stuff like the FFIEC Joint Statement on Cloud and some of the updated guidance around the FFIEC Examiner's Handbook, which some of you guys may know very well. So, thanks. I'm happy to join you guys today.
Thank you so much, David. Sharon.
Thanks, Raz, and happy to be here. My name is Sharan Singh, and I'm accountable for security engineering and architecture at Bank of Montreal. So here I include everything from cloud security, whether infrastructure or SaaS, that my team handles. And before that, I spent over 20 years at JP Morgan Chase and Citibank, running various type of cybersecurity functions, both in the US, Asia, and Europe.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you all for joining us today and sharing from your expertise. I think CISO has always seemed like a very stressful job to me, and I think in financials it's even like you're taking it to the next level. So super excited to kind of hear your perspective on things today. And I'll start. First of all with thinking about, do you have experience working at organizations that are earlier in their cloud journey or at later stages? And Tony, I'm going to again start with you because I know you have quite the history when it comes to cybersecurity and digital transformation.
Yeah, there's really probably some challenges that were quite daunting back in 2013. When I was at Capital One, I came on there as the CISO to build kind of a cyber program and a cloud program that was, really to be, obviously well buttoned up, had strong governance, had strong cyber when there really wasn't any tooling available for anyone. You really had to do it all yourself. I think the first regulatory exam, since we had the first regulatory exam, was until 2016. And, the real challenge, that's really different from cloud to on-prem is that when you're on-prem, you're always challenged with how do we get data to be uniform in our cyber program from all the various different products. Some companies have well over 100 cybersecurity products. And to get all those formats right and to make good decisions and combine it with threat intelligence is always a daunting task. I think one of the things that changes in the cloud is it's really not hard to get data about what's happening with cyber. You have so much data, it really becomes of how do you use it well and how do you make good decisions since you actually have all the data right there and available to you to be really strong with governance and really thoughtful about your cyber program. Vulnerability management changes, right? You move from going through what used to be a 6-week process of testing, staging, and working with an IT program to remove vulnerabilities from systems to going out to the cloud and just deleting instances that have vulnerabilities and just spinning up new gold, AMIs if you're running on Amazon. You have this kind of immutable infrastructure. And then I think the other thing that's pretty exciting from a transformation perspective, especially for a CISO or a CIO, is that you kind of get to start fresh. I know a lot of legacy, and I think the really dirty word for CIOs is tech debt, is the amount of tech debt, over time, of systems that age out, go end of life, present really massive cyber problems. Big advantage if you really do it right is you never have to worry about aging or tech debt. You can constantly be in a place where you're updating your new images. But at the same time, the challenge, that we saw, and I think it's really relevant today, is you have to have the talent, right? You have to have the talent and the expertise and the know-how to do it.
Absolutely. Sharon, I'd love to hear about this from you as well. I mean, do you have experience mostly in organizations that were earlier in their cloud journey or later stages?
Yes, I do. So similar to Tony, like most companies, began a cloud journey, I would say about 10 years ago in that time frame. And especially in banking industry, since we're highly regulated, we had to be very careful that how do we even write a contract with AWS and Azure, because things like breach notification, very simple thing, because as a bank we had to notify to OCC in 4 hours if you're breach, and how do you make sure your cloud service providers are also meeting that requirements or not. So those kind of things are pretty interesting. But I would say that um, one was a big cultural change, because how do you build things on premise and how do you run things on premise versus cloud? They're completely different things. So that was a pretty interesting part to make sure that we have a pretty modern thinking to go to cloud as well. And also, I think bit of a complexity when you're on the cloud journey, because you have some stuff running on premise and some stuff running in the cloud. So how do you ensure that you have some tools which are on premise can also work the same way, and you have some modern tool in the cloud? So from operations perspective, you're not increasing too much complexity from day-to-day perspective. So in my opinion, that was a pretty interesting and challenging learning.
Thank you both. Now, what is the difference between a CISO working in financial services and a CISO at a traditional tech company? And I'll start with you, David.
Oh, sure. So I think, from a financial services perspective, the regulations, as Tony and Sharon mentioned, are significantly more onerous, and there's, a lot of potential downstream consequences. As a former regulator that would help lead and conduct some of these examinations, any organization that's being examined, nobody ever gets an A if you want to look at it from a report card point of view. If you're pretty good at what you're doing, you're just going to come out with observations, which means we've looked at some things, we see some areas where you could improve, but you haven't done anything that actually gives us a significant amount of concern. And then after that, the ratings kind of go downhill, based on, what level of concern that we have. There's things called, matters requiring attention or matters requiring immediate attention, where if you wind up with findings like that, all of a sudden, those are things that we expect you have to address as an institution, because either it presents risk to yourself as a financial institution, or it presents systemic risk if it's something really potentially egregious. So we look at those things and look at not only how is the ecosystem being protected, but how is that financial institution protecting itself? So you really have to start thinking about that. And as the organizations kind of embrace these new technologies, everybody tends to want to run fast into these things. But as Tony mentioned, just based on experience, strategy and planning and having a well thought out move to the cloud is very important then versus like a lift and shift.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for that. And Sharon, I mean, you've also held multiple InfoSec leadership positions at financial institutions. How do you see the difference?
I would agree with David. Like, CISO is a stressful job, anyways, to begin with. You sleep with your cell phone all the time, and having all different regulations coming from different angles, both cybersecurity and privacy, that makes that role even more interesting. I will add a couple more points to that, especially for the large institutions, banking industry, because they have grown through like M&A activities. So what happens with that, you have some part of the bank which is not fully integrated to your overall ecosystem. And with that, what happens is that from cybersecurity perspective, you have increased attack surface. And how do you make sure that you're taking care of that? The other part I've seen that sometimes you have legacy infrastructure in the environment, and for which banks need that infrastructure to run some banking function, but you may not have enough patching or end of life support to run that infrastructure. So that creates additional challenges for the cybersecurity leaders. But one thing I've seen in the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, the CISO role has changed, being more technical to be more on the business side, where CISOs have now to present to the board and have more, I would say, face time with the CEOs as well. So, in my opinion, like cybersecurity leaders have a good opportunity that how do we kind of use cybersecurity as a business enabler. And the good example I always call out, like, when Apple came out with the whole touch ID or face ID, that how can you use biometrics or authentication as a customer experience enabler? I think we should think about those opportunities and how can we add cybersecurity to the business advantage.
100% agree. Um, I'll move to thinking a bit more about risk. So, Tony, I'd love to hear from you a little bit. What are some of the biggest challenges financial institutions face when it comes to minimizing risk in the cloud?
Yeah, I think the challenge is really an interesting one because you're really kind of bifurcating two demands is what the business demands and customer trust. And, as you've seen in financial institutions, providing great service to customers, bringing innovative products to market, competition from fintech to be more personal in service delivery really demands technology teams to be using the most cutting edge technologies, being agile, and providing those services that customers want that are very personalized technologies to them. While at the same time, you also have to provide that customer trust. And I think that's really what the challenge is and why you really need to be cloud first is you're going to need that agility to make changes quickly, but the ultimate problem that we have in the back office is you have to have the right safeguards, right? If you can have the right safeguards and the right guardrails to leverage cloud, maintain strong governance while using the greatest technologies, it's kind of symbolic of having a really holistic structure around how you can deliver service. But I think the real challenge is knowing those two things you're trying to balance around customer trust and the business demands of great products and services is having a team that understands strong governance for the cloud while actually building the right controls for both security and regulatory management to really navigate those challenges.
Thank you. Sharon, how do you see this? How do you see the biggest challenges financials face when it comes to cloud?
The way I think about it, like if we use cloud adoption the same way as we have it on premise, it's not going to help us. So we have to rethink the entire operating model in terms of your processes, your frameworks, your methodologies, tools, and techniques. And the more important aspect is, I think Tony touched upon, is the people aspect, the cultural aspect, like the whole development team sitting on one side, ops sitting somewhere else, cyber sitting somewhere else. That model will not work in cloud, or you'll not get the full benefits of cloud. So we have to think more holistically in that what kind of Gartner calls DevSecOps, or like the famous buzzword. But how do we bring these teams together, development, cybersecurity, and ops team together? And in many cases, these roles have blurred now, very into very kind of a streamlined manner. So having that kind of a cultural shift, having the modern technologies, and then having the right processes can help us. So going back to like patching used to be a big nightmare for cybersecurity teams, but in the cloud environment, everything is ephemeral. So you can rebuild new images rather than going and patching your infrastructure. So it helps from cybersecurity perspective. Granted, if we have designed the things the right way, but if you're still using cloud the old way, it will not help you from cybersecurity perspective.
David, would you agree? Anything to add?
Sure, I definitely concur with what my colleagues have said, because there's a very big difference of getting the value out of the cloud by being cloud native versus doing that lift and shift, where then you've wrapped your legacy tech debt in another form of technology, and now you have two issues to support, and you definitely aren't necessarily getting the value out of it. So I'd say the big value is cloud native, as my colleagues have mentioned, and the key thing there is, if you're a regulated organization, is understanding your risks, because from a business perspective, it's acceptable to outsource anything. But from a regulatory perspective, you can never outsource the accountability for the decision. So you can choose to put whatever services wherever you want as an outsourcing or business decision. But from a regulatory point of view, we'll remind you that the accountability stays with you.
Yeah. And I think we have time for one final question before we move to the rapid questions round. I'd like to summarize by asking each of you, and Tony, I'll start with you. What are some of the best practices you followed in order to improve your security posture?
Yeah, I think some of the best practices is to think a little bit differently about controls and cyber in the cloud. A lot of things that we did from a policy perspective and a process perspective, which is a big advantage of the cloud, is that we can look at automation, right? And the thing we used to say is, if it's a possibility to automate these policies so that there's no divergence and the guardrails stay solid, I think that's a really tremendous opportunity as you move to the cloud. And we used to call it removing human in the loop. And the more we could remove human in the loop on a lot of things that were just basic structures around, server builds, instance builds, identity structures, authorization schemas, all those things that a lot of times we had to do with pushing paper around or making sure somebody did the right thing. One of the really opportunities, if you have the expertise, is you can automate all of that so you don't fail any of those control structures. And I think earlier I mentioned, I think the challenge of really being able to wrangle all of the cyber data that you have available to you, the cloud, is a great opportunity to think, differently. It's not so much about, do I have the ability to get the right data? It's, do I have the ability to really understand and make decisions with the right data that I'm getting in the cloud?
Thank you so much, Tony. David, what about you?
Sure, and I definitely concur with what Tony said, and being the fact that I'm cloud native 100% now, being a crypto organization, I think, as my colleagues mentioned, it's no longer of can you do DevSecOps? It's you have to do DevSecOps. We run our algorithms, we run our trading engines, we run everything in the cloud. So there is no time for manual intervention. Manual intervention costs the business money at this point in time. So I have to have a high degree of automation and a high degree of visibility.
Thank you. Sharon.
Yeah, along the same lines, one, two things I would highlight. So one is, in the cloud environment, you have new services being stood up very quickly, right? So the ecosystem is much larger, but the good thing is one cohesive ecosystem. So as we look at the security posture, some tools are pretty good, giving you very contextual information about the posture of the cloud compared to giving high, medium, low, and which makes things better for us because you have better context about the health. They can do more effective and efficient action. And second is, I think what Tony talked about, infrastructure as a code, we can take a lot of like what we call reactive action to more preventative action. So as you learn things from the security posture, can we write as a code to prevent it happening in the future? It's a pretty big plus for us that we can use that as an opportunity to go from detective or reactive to preventative manner.
Thank you. Thank you all. And now we'll move into two rapid fire questions, meaning each kind of quick questions. So first of all, as security experts, what is one security mistake you'll never make again? David, I'll start with you.
I'd say underestimating the amount of training that the team required as bringing on these new technologies. I thought it would be a shorter learning curve.
Great answer, Tony.
I think it probably goes back to something my golf instructor. I'm a terrible golfer, so hopefully I'm a better at cyber. Is you said, look, if you want to hit the ball farther, hit it softer. And that's really applies to cloud. If you really want to do it right, do not skip steps, right? Go slow, don't rush into it, take your time, and really think about governance as you do this.
Sharon.
Your job is never done in cybersecurity. Never. Like you have new threats coming in, business priorities are changing, new tools and technologies are coming, and then you have a lack of cybersecurity expertise on top of it. So all these things makes you pretty very, very busy.
Thank you. Next and last rapid question. What are you most optimistic about in InfoSec this year? And we'll go with the same order. So David.
So I think the cloud has come a long way. So I'm looking for, I guess, for me being 100% cloud native and SaaS, tighter integration between all of my platforms. Because right now, instead of having that physical data center, I have different clouds, I have different SaaS applications, and I have a need for tight integration to really improve my visibility.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, I think we've entered into an interesting phase for cyber where it's not so much about what's the next big bang solution, but how do we improve the health of all the cyber tooling that we've got in our infrastructure, and how do we improve the efficacy? I think CISOs are being really careful about how do we get everything to work together. Given we may be doing some cloud transitions, maybe we are trying to improve on-prem as well. But getting everything to work together and getting the tooling more efficient is what I'm seeing a lot of people doing. And I'm really optimistic about that because I think many times we don't have everything we need working most effectively.
Thank you. Sharon.
I'm optimistic about simplification because complexity is enemy of cybersecurity. So more simple solutions we have, more simple architectures we have that can give us an homogeneous view around the entire ecosystem. And I've begun to see that with the cloud service providers, with the security vendors in the ecosystem that can provide us a very common platform to help us in cybersecurity.
Thank you all. And with that, we'll move to some really great questions we got from our audience. So I'll just throw the question and then whoever wants to take it, take it. So first question, and it's a big one. I mean, I think it's one of the most interesting topics in discussion today when it comes to cloud. How is detection response different in the cloud?
I mean, I'll jump in real quick. I'd say for one, make sure your incident response plan is up to date and reflects the current technology. Acquiring forensic images and acquiring other data is very different depending upon what cloud platform you're using or what SaaS applications you're into. So you need to have that plan in place, including who are the right contacts to be reaching out to, for doing these investigations and follow-ups.
Anybody else wants to add on this one?
I would add just one thing. test, test, test. Because sometimes we have write nice playbooks, and then when we have some incident, we forget like who to contact. Do we have the right alerts? So have either third party come in to test your plans and your incident playbooks as well.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question, again, a hard one. How do you effectively deal with situations where sometimes the business needs override security frameworks?
Yeah, I think that's more about being, really balanced and thoughtful about partnering with the business. I think there's going to be always times that you really want to understand, if there's changes that need to be made. But I think really having a good understanding of what the risks are and what the mitigation opportunities are. And I think a lot of times there's a real disconnect between the business and technology. So what's important is to have kind of a function in place where you have kind of a risk committee that can help you adjudicate challenges between the business and the technology organization and do it kind of in the light of day, to where everybody's aware of it and you're making good decision based upon all the facts.
And I'll add one thing to Tony's comment. As I mentioned early on, like CISOs are being a business leader as well, besides a technical leader. So having that business mindset, having early engagement with the business leaders to understand what their roadmaps are, helps from both sides. So business leaders understand what the cybersecurity requirements are, and similarly, the cybersecurity or CISOs know what the business needs are.
Thank you. Another great question. How hard is it to keep the same security posture, like adapt the same policies, controls, checks, etc., across the different cloud providers?
Yeah, across cloud providers can be challenging because the challenge isn't so much in the cloud providers, it's understanding how to affect those different policy variations in those different types of cloud providers. So if you've got 3 or more cloud providers, you have to have personnel on your staff that understands how to execute those things 3 different ways in 3 different cloud providers. And that's kind of what the ultimate challenges are. I mean, there are cybersecurity tools now that do work across cloud providers, but if you're looking to move your entire policy set that you might have for all of your NIST-based framework or whatever framework you're using, that is going to be challenging, and because you want to be thorough across every cloud provider. So yeah, I would say it's hard, but certainly it's doable.
Yeah, and I would just add to that the vendor onboarding part is super important, especially from a SaaS point of view of kind of going into it. There's so many different SaaS products out there that you want to have a good idea of, are you going to have the right level of visibility or security capabilities, prior to onboarding that SaaS application and getting stuck with something where it doesn't meet your security expectations.
Perfect. I think we have time for one last question. I think it's a great one. Do you think cloud threat modeling finds some space to help secure a cloud infrastructure? Also, maybe add from my own, I think it's a question I've thought about often. Before Wiz, I used to work in Microsoft. We had those processes where, you do threat modeling with a security team, but in cloud, things sometimes change so fast by the time you review, right? Everything already has changed. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about threat modeling when it comes to cloud infrastructure.
I can chime in. So, threat modeling is more prevalent in the application space because this is how it started, maybe 20 years ago, 20, 25 years ago by Microsoft. So it's logically for us to be able to use more effectively in the app space. In the infrastructure space, I would say the architecture is not as called complex sometimes. So threat modeling, in my opinion, I have not seen used that much, but more on the workload level.
Yeah, I would add to that too. I think one of the things that's also important is as you think about DevSecOps and have kind of more of an agile framework, what you're going to find is that everybody becomes a threat modeler, right? I think to the previous point is you got to blur those lines sometimes between the AppSec team and the AppSec people, right? And all the people that are building applications. So that DevSecOps construct everyone's kind of just in time and adjusting threat modeling on the fly. And you've got to be open to that. Thinking of threat modeling is as static doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, for me, it's been like super tight integration is really important. It was one thing to get the developers on board, but I found also I have to get the traders and quants on board, because it turns out they know enough and do enough programming that they can also create a whole different set of challenges.
Absolutely. Okay, with that, we are exactly at time. So first of all, thank you so much, Tony, David, Sharon. And thank you, everybody, for taking time of your day and joining us, and for the great questions. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.